and it's not your fault, General Bolden. You do a superb job. The men and women at NASA do a great job, but it is very difficult for us to get our arms around the fact that the White House would actually expect the Congress to cut NASA by over $1 billion, and is not giving you the support that you need, sir. We are also, I think it's important to note that NASA has just accepted a new group of applications for just 14 spots in your 2017 class of astronauts, an indication of the level of support the country has for the work that you do. They had over 18,300 applications for 14 spots as astronauts. That is a record that surpasses the previous 1978 record of 8,000 applications, and it's an indication, I think, of the level of support the country has for the work that you do. Every time there's a new space mission, a new landing, a new launch, the NASA website becomes one of the most popular in the country. There's just a tremendous amount of support out there for what you do, and it just continues to be baffling to us as to why Office Management and Budget refuses to give you the support that we think you deserve. But this subcommittee will make sure that you get the resources that you need. Again, this is going to be a tough budget year, and we'll be right there behind you, sir, every step of the way. And before we proceed, I'd like to recognize Mr. Honda for any remarks he'd like to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Administrator Bolden. And thank you for being here today. It's good to see you again. Let me just take a moment to thank you again for the great visit we had a couple of weeks ago at NASA Ames. You and I spent a better part of a day together. For me, an unprecedented over 5 hours, and that was really cool. And I really appreciate the effort the Ames family went through to accommodate the visit and highlight some of the amazing groundbreaking work that the scientists and engineers are performing at Ames in support of this mission, NASA's mission. And Mr. Chairman, perhaps you and I can go on a tour of NASA Johnson down near your home in Houston, Texas. I've still been waiting for an invitation, but you know, I'm patient. Perhaps we can organize a trip for the subcommittee to Goddard or JPL, and I'd love to meet more of the NASA family and see firsthand some of the other great work being performed around the country. Administrator Bolden, as you know, Chairman Culberson and I share the same passion for science, and I love it when he starts talking about, we'll get you more money, we'll get you more money, which sounds just like a great Democrat, you know. But actually, this is not a partisan issue. It's about a national priority and moving us forward in the whole arena of knowledge and pursuing knowledge, that which we know, and then that's which we are seeking. So this passion is also evident in last year's final budget that included the healthiest top line NASA has seen in many years. And I just want to thank Mr. Chairman for that. This year, I'm looking forward to building on our work from last year and continuing robust support for NASA in a wide variety of missions, from exploring our neighboring worlds and probing the creation of the universe, to improving our understanding of our own planet, and working with commercial partners to strengthen America's presence in space and supporting the burgeoning commercial space industry, which is constantly growing. That being said, I share my colleagues' frustrations with this year's proposed discretionary budget from the President that recommends scaling back our support for NASA by reducing NASA's discretionary top line by $1 billion. I'll be more accurate, the Chairman said $1.3 billion. And so we're going to be working together on this. This is a time to be invested in NASA, not selling it short. And at the same time, I would like to also urge my colleagues to support an overall level of non-defense discretionary resources that would allow us to provide a healthy budget for NASA overall. Americans are really inspired by the successes and breakthrough of NASA and our commercial partners, be it the amazing photos of Pluto captured by New Horizons, Scott Kelly's triumphant year in space, or the successful first stage landings of SpaceX and Blue Origin rockets. Americans are captivated by space and NASA. Movies like The Martian, Gravity, Interstellar taps into this public support and help fan the flames of support. And nothing highlights this more than the record-shattering, as it was said, 18,300 applicants who applied to become a NASA astronaut last month. So you said 14 point what? How many?
14 spots.
Oh, 14 spot. I thought you said 14.3. I was wondering who the .3 was going to be. And so what I would be interested in is if there's a way we can get some information on the demography of the applicants, who they are, where they're from, all that sort of interesting. As an educator, I'd be interested in the source and where we're coming from. So I look forward to hearing your testimony this morning and to learn more about NASA's programs and how NASA is going to capitalize on the strong public interest and create the most impactful and inspiring missions to both improve life on Earth and push our frontiers further out into the cosmos. Ooh. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. General Bolden, we really do appreciate your service. Thank you for being here today. And without objection, your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety, and we'd welcome your summary of your testimony. If you can do so within approximately 5 minutes.
Yes, sir. I will do my best. And Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, it's my extreme pleasure, and it's actually an honor for me to be here today to discuss with you President Obama's $19 billion fiscal year 2017 budget request for NASA. And it's unusual for me to do this, but because there are young students here, I want them to go back understanding how this process works. And I think you mischaracterize me when you say that, that I'm disappointed in the President's budget. I am not. I helped to craft it, and I'm very proud of that budget. And we will discuss in this hearing how we got there and then the process that you all are going to use to give us the funds that we finally get in appropriations, because what they should take away is that the President proposes, which means it's a proposal, and the Congress disposes, which means you all give us the money. And as you said, that's what becomes the budget. So I didn't want them to go away thinking that the NASA administrator was not happy with with the President's budget, because I am. We worked really hard to bring you that budget. So now I wasted a lot of my time. This request builds on the outstanding FY 2016 NASA appropriation that this Congress gave us last year. And I mean it when I say it was an outstanding budget. $19.3 billion is not chump change. And we really want to be able to extend what that budget allows us to do, and that was the way we crafted the 2017 budget. I want to thank you again, Mr. Chairman, personally, for your leadership in crafting the 2016 budget. So it's my honor to serve as the NASA administrator throughout the Obama administration, and as we submit what is likely, as you mentioned, my final budget, I'm also proud of the many things this agency has accomplished on behalf of the American people with the resources the President and Congress have committed to us over the past 7 years. Together, we have enabled our nation to continue leading the world in space exploration and scientific discovery. 2 weeks ago, American astronaut Scott Kelly returned home from the International Space Station after 12 months working off the Earth for the Earth. His year in space will pay scientific and medical dividends for years to come, helping pave the way for future astronauts to travel to Mars and beyond. Commander Kelly significantly advanced our journey to Mars, and I trust that you join me in saluting his service to our nation. NASA is closer to sending American astronauts to Mars than at any point in human history, and this budget will keep us moving forward. The support of this committee and Congress is essential to this journey. The International Space Station is the cornerstone of our exploration strategy. Thanks to the determination and ingenuity of American industry, we have returned space station cargo resupply launches to U.S. soil, in-source jobs, and helped establish a new private market in low Earth orbit. American companies are now ferrying supplies to our astronauts on the space station from the United States, with orbital ATK set to launch again later this month, in fact next week, and SpaceX targeting a resupply mission in early April, both from the Kennedy Space Center. In July, Orbital will conduct a return-to-flight mission from the Wallops Flight Facility. Thanks to the administration's decision to invest in American industry and to this committee's full funding in last year's budget, Boeing and SpaceX continue to make great progress toward certification in 2017 to safely transport our astronauts to the space station from U.S. soil, ending our sole reliance on Russia once and for all. NASA is making significant progress on the journey to Mars, developing our newest, most powerful rocket ever built, the Space Launch System, and the Orion crew vehicle as part of a sustainable and affordable deep space exploration system. This budget supports the agency's baseline commitment for an uncrewed test flight of SLS and Orion in 2018 and a crewed flight by 2023. With additional funding provided by Congress, the teams are working toward an earlier launch date for the first crewed mission and are already designing and procuring long lead hardware for subsequent missions. The budget also increases funding for habitation systems development, a key component of our stepping stone strategy to send humans to Mars. The President's budget funds a robust science program with dozens of operating missions studying our solar system, the universe, and the most important planet in our solar system, Earth. This coming July 4th, Independence Day, the Juno spacecraft will orbit Jupiter, while the Cassini spacecraft will prepare to execute its dramatic grand finale orbits of Saturn. OSIRIS-REx will launch to a near-Earth asteroid to collect samples for return to Earth in 2023. In 2017 and 18, NASA will launch 7 exciting space science missions, including the James Webb Space Telescope. Before we send humans to Mars, robots are paving the way, with Mars InSight now targeted for launch in 2018. Another Mars rover set to launch in 2020, joining the Curiosity and Opportunity rovers now exploring the Red Planet, and work underway to define the next Mars mission for 2022. We are formulating missions to explore Jupiter's moon, Europa, as well as WFIRST, designed to study dark energy, perform galactic and extragalactic surveys, and explore exoplanets. We're accelerating the building of Landsat 9 as part of our sustainable land imaging architecture to continue over our 40-year record of high-quality measurement of Earth's land cover. NASA technology drives exploration. With this request, NASA will continue to conduct rapid development and incorporation of transformative space technologies to enable future human and robotic missions, increase capabilities of other U.S. agencies, and address aerospace industry challenges. Space technology investments will ensure that we continue to lead the world in exploration and scientific discovery. NASA's Aeronautics program advances U.S. global leadership by developing and transferring key enabling technologies to make aviation safer, more efficient, and more environmentally friendly. With this request, NASA Aeronautics is ready to take the next step to develop and fly X-plane demonstrators in partnership with industry and academia, including ultra-efficient subsonic transport experimental aircraft and the world's first low-boom supersonic flight demonstrator. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate the strong and consistent support we have received from this committee. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Bolden. We appreciate the fact that the budget does indeed include a Outer Planets and Ocean Worlds exploration program. That's something these young people in the audience and around the country are going to become increasingly excited about as they discover that there are indeed water worlds out there that have probably some of the best potential for us finding life on another world. And I'm very pleased to see that the budget request does acknowledge that what we in the Congress included in the 16 bill created an Ocean Worlds program for that reason, and have focused on the Europa mission in particular as the first one to fly because of the decadal survey of planetary scientists. For the young people in the audience, anyone listening, every 10 years, General, the planetary scientific community, the scientific community gets together at the national academies and develop a 10-year plan for looking forward to decide what are the most important missions that should be flown, and heliophysics and studying the sun, or studying the Earth and studying the planets, and then looking out beyond our own solar system. And that decadal survey is a good roadmap for the next 10 years. And in our 16 bill, I made sure we included in our 16 bill guidance to NASA to look to those decadal surveys in each one of those areas is a kind of a blueprint of where NASA should go over the next decade. And that blueprint for the planetary scientists listed the Mars mission 2020 as number 1, to cache samples from the surface and retrieve them later. That mission has been funded and is going to be done. And their number 2 priority this decade, and their top priority last decade, was the mission to Europa, because that moon contains at least 2 to 3 times more salt water than there is on Earth, has all the basic ingredients for life to be present. And so we're very supportive of the work that NASA is doing to send an orbiter and a lander to Europa to find out whether or not there's organic molecules in that ocean. And the Could you comment, General, on your feelings about the decadal survey recommendation that Europa's? Do you agree with the decadal survey recommendation that the Europa mission is important?
Mr. Chairman, having talked to Steve Squires, who chaired the latest planetary decadal, I agree with the priorities that they set, and one of the things that I was most impressed with was the fact that he really looked hard at cost, and so, you know, I think that they are projects that can be done, and that's why we have set Mars 2020 and a sample return as #1 in compliance with the decadal survey, and we're now trying to formulate the mission to Europa, and I assume we'll talk a little bit more about that as
Sure.
the hearing goes by.
Well, you know, the Congress gives you direction. That's actually the one
Sure.
mission it's illegal for NASA not to fly is the Europa mission, because it's so important that we find out whether or not we're alone in the universe, and then also to help I think, galvanize the public. One of the reasons I've been so interested in this mission is not only has it been the decadal survey was the top priority last decade, and the last NASA administrator, your predecessors neglected it. It was cast by the wayside, and this time we want to make sure it's done. So it's a directive from the Congress to make sure this mission is flown, and we made sure you got the resources to do it. And right now I know that there's a design work is going forward on the lander. Correct? And
Mr. Chairman, we have a total effort going on the Europa mission entirely, which is orbiter and lander. I think you and I have discussed this before. My strong recommendation to the committee and my strong recommendation to the community would be that we separate an orbiter from a lander in order to optimize our chances of being successful with both. When we look at the Mars program as a model, before we landed, we actually landed Mariner 4 in 1965, and it was 11 years later when we put the Viking 1 and 2 on the surface of Mars, and that was for a very good reason, the fact that we just didn't know the Martian surface, and we wanted to make sure that we understood it fully. We're in the same situation with Europa. We want to make sure that we characterize the surface of the moon prior to deciding on a place that we're going to put a lander. We're definitely working on a lander, but you know, my strong recommendation would be that we separate a lander from an orbiter in the mission. But that remains to be done. We expect that we'll be at preliminary design review in 2018, and at that time it'll say whether or not we have a lander and an orbiter together. It'll say what kind of launch vehicle we use and the like. So we're responding to the direction from the Congress.
Good, thank you, sir. And we I understand what you're saying and appreciate the fact your scientists are looking at engineers right now whether to launch the lander separately, and the orbiter would obviously go first. And I understand what you're saying. The discussions are ongoing right now about whether or not you want to put the lander on the same rocket or launch it separately. May indeed be, I think you're probably right, maybe a good idea to launch them on two separate SLS rockets so that the orbiter goes first in order to scout the surface as Mariner 4 did. Mariner 4 was, of course, a flyby, and then we did orbiters and then landed second. So that is the direction the Europa mission's taken. I think that's a very good idea. And as always, your folks at the flight centers do a terrific job.
Yes, sir. I'm
particularly impressed with the work that the flight centers, for example, up at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory is a federally funded research and development center, and the Johns Hopkins University has a similar arrangement with
APL, Applied Physics Laboratory.
Applied Physics Lab.
Yes, sir.
And they do a superb job. And you've got the universities are essentially running the flight center, and they are in a 5-year contract, I think, with NASA, and they're reviewed every 5 years.
Sure.
I am keenly interested in trying to find a way to replicate that model for some of the other flight centers to get the young people involved, the university community, scientists, engineers, graduate students involved in helping these NASA flight centers. From your perspective, I really would love to have your thoughts, General.
You're going to get me in trouble, Mr. Chairman.
It's difficult with the human spaceflight program. I think
Sure.
that's very different.
Sure.
That's a real challenge. But when it comes to, for example, Ames in Mr. Honda's district, with all those great universities right there, Stanford and others right there, the Glenn Flight Center in Ohio. Sure. Could you give us your thoughts on how we could think about looking into the future.
Yes, sir.
Transitioning perhaps Ames into maybe have Stanford and some other great universities in the area bid on adopting Ames, taking over Ames, and running it like a federally funded research and development center like JPL, like Caltech does JPL. How can we replicate that model at some of their flight centers, and what are your thoughts on that? Mr.
Chairman, you know, the national academies have done studies on this in the past. We've actually done studies, and based on the information that I have, mainly to include information yesterday from my deputy who served on National Academy boards that looked at this, I would not recommend that NASA go the model of, you know, of more than one FFRDC. The examples you gave, Ames does an incredible job right now of engaging the students, both undergraduate, graduate, and postgrad on the campus of Stanford and other neighboring universities. Right now, if you go out to the Ames Astrobiology Center, you'll be introduced to something called the BioBrick, and that's the result of collaboration between students at Stanford University and people at the Ames Astrobiology Center, and that's what we're going to use when we go to the surface of Mars. So it's a study that probably needs to be done again, but based on my limited knowledge and what I've read from the academies and others, I would be leery of trying to assign more than the FFRDC that we have right now for NASA.
Why?
Well, I've served on advisory committee for Lawrence Livermore Lab, and one of the things that frustrated me was the fact that it did not get along with its sister labs. Each lab is an entity unto its own. They're run by a contractor. There is no single mission. I would really defer to the Secretary of Energy because he lives and breathes with FFRDCs every day. That's the bulk of his centers are that way. And I just found, you know, as a NASA administrator, when I set a mission for the agency and I bring all the center directors together and say, okay, look, I want to hear everybody's opinion, I want to hear all the dissenting opinion, and after that, I'm going to make a decision, and we're all going in that direction. The journey to Mars, for example. You couldn't do that with a bunch of FFRDCs because they operate independently. They don't have any single person like the NASA administrator who says, you're going to do this. They're all set up for different things. That would be my, you know, my opinion, my humble opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we can continue this discussion. It's the first I've heard of it. It's kind of an interesting question, but it's one that came out of right field for me. So we'll talk about that. The John Bolden, as you know, I'm a strong supporter of NASA's Earth Science program, though not everyone in Congress is of the same view of NASA's Earth Science. Could you please talk about some of the ways in which the NASA Earth Science program benefits American private sector enterprises and the nation as a whole, and then what returns are we getting on this investment? And in terms of the agency's Earth Science portfolio,
Yes, sir.
what role does airborne science play? And in the interest of the recent announcement of the Earth Venture instrumentation program and use of CubeSat and SmallSat, what role do you see these two entities play in Earth science?
Congressman Honda, when I think about the value of Earth science, in the way you phrase your question, it has enormous both economic and strategic value. And I'll try to give you a couple of examples. For example, we have the GRACE mission right now and SMAP, and I hate using acronyms, but I will. I could read you the long name, but it won't make any difference. But both of them look at water on the planet. GRACE uses gravity to determine the amount of water in reservoirs and underground aquifers and the like, and then SMAP is actually looking at soil moisture for its primary part. Those have provided useful information to farmers, to decision makers, particularly out in the West right now, as they go through droughts. John Deere Corporation is working with us, looking at the potential to use GRACE and SMAP data in some of the work that they do. A lot of farmers today follow a model that was developed in Israel, something that's called drip irrigation, where satellites feed data down to the ground. It goes into a computer. The computer says, okay, the ground's nice and moist today, don't need to water. Tomorrow, the satellite may come over and say it's really dry, you need some water, and the computer determines how much, and it turns on the drip system, and it goes right into the root system of the plants or the vines, if it's a vineyard out in Southern California, in the valley where most of our wine is done. UAV SAR, since you mentioned airborne Earth obs, UAV SAR is a series of it's a synthetic aperture radar that we can put on a number of NASA airplanes, and that has been used. It was used in the Gulf during the BP oil spill years ago. It has now been. We're trying to deploy it at the request of FEMA and the National Weather Service to look at levees and to look at some of the other structures in East Texas and Louisiana, resulting in the floods, trying to help decision makers understand what to do. So all of those things are the use of NASA assets for economic and strategic value, not to mention Landsat, which we actually bill Landsat for USGS, for the U.S. Geological Survey in the Department of the Interior. But it is through that 43-year program now that we have had the most robust land imaging system, I think, in the world.
Okay, thank you. Very quickly, the Aeronautics program, as you know, is the first area of NASA, and it comprises work that NASA's been doing for a long time now. But given the size of the program relative to other NASA directorates, it doesn't usually get the same level of public attention as other programs do. I'd like to focus some attention on this important work. Could you talk a little bit about some of the ways in which the work of Aeronautics Directorate and the funding that you're requesting for it how it can help enhance our competitiveness in aviation, create jobs here, and some of the other benefits that personally I'm looking for too.
Well,
as a airport that has.
As a former Marine Corps pilot, since I don't fly anymore, I am partial toward the first A, the big A in NASA, which is aeronautics, and I'm very proud to say that over the period of time that I've been the NASA administrator, we have taken a crawl, walk, run, but thanks to the committee again, we have funding in the NASA budget, and the President is proposing in the 2017 budget additional funding that will allow us to get into our New Aviation Horizons program, program that came about as a result of revamping our aeronautics strategic plan in 2014 and looking with industry and academia at 6 strategic thrust areas that we want to do in aeronautics. I think every member of the committee should have a little flyer like this, and I apologize that I don't have one of these for Europa, but we talk about Europa a lot and we don't talk about aeronautics, so that's why I chose to focus on aeronautics, and I'll hopefully get it to the students back here. But it talks real quickly about the New Aviation Horizons program, whereby NASA, for the first time in decades, is actually going to be able to engage in building experimental airplanes again, what we call X-planes, but they're flight demonstrators. The top ones for us right now, and it's just because industry is so far along on wanting to build a supersonic transport, that the first one out of the chute is going to be the low-boom supersonic demonstrator that will allow us to give data to the FAA so they can change the regulations that today prohibit supersonic flight over ground. Another one is hybrid electric propulsion, so that will actually save fuel, be much more efficient, if you will. We're looking at a hybrid wing body. All of these things will help industry, and we think it will help the airline industry, for example, to save as much as $225 billion over the next 25 years as a result of the work that we at NASA have been doing with the aviation industry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, thank you for being here. A couple quick questions. First one about Kennedy Space Center. A couple of years back, NASA moved the launch complex 39A over to private vendors, if you will, for I guess the comprehensive suite of management. Can you update us on that and on then competition for infrastructure, if you will, and whether or not that has slowed SLS or not?
It has had no effect on SLS whatsoever, and I think the reference you make to 39A is that is the historic launch pad from which Neil Armstrong and his crew launched. When we phased the shuttle out, we determined that we didn't need 2 full launch complexes, and rather than mothball 39A, we made the decision that in our ongoing effort to try to commercialize as much as possible, we would compete I know there were several companies that competed. SpaceX was finally awarded a long-term lease for 39A. I've not physically seen it myself, but everybody that tells me says that it has undergone a complete revision,
Sure,
and it's incredible. That's where they intend to launch the Falcon Heavy later this year, we hope. In the meantime, we have continued our work on SLS and Orion, and I would invite anybody who wants to go to Michoud down in Louisiana or go to the Cape if you want to see Orion. We actually have, we completed the wells on the first crew module for Orion that will fly on EM1, an uncrewed flight, but that's done. We're continuing to work on Orion. It's on schedule. SLS, we're actually producing barrel sections that go in the core stage of SLS down at Michoud. We just last week at Stennis fired a full 500-second firing on the cluster of, on one of the RS-25 engines that's going to go in the cluster of 4 for SLS, and we're about to start testing on the engines that will be used for EM2. We have test fired the SRB, the Advanced Solid Rocket Booster for EM1 out in Utah, and we have another test firing coming up this spring. So I don't, you know, our work with commercial entities has actually enhanced our work with SLS and Orion because it's freed us up from having to worry about providing access to low Earth orbit. I know Mr. Kilmer is really interested in commercial space flight and stuff.
Sure,
and
sure.
It's the partnership between commercial and government that has actually allowed us to focus on SLS, Orion, and deep space exploration while industry and entrepreneurs take over access to low Earth orbit.
So it's been a success at 39A without any delay in operations?
There has been, I would have to ask Elon about whether or not he thinks there's been no delay. As
Sure.
far as I know, we have not delayed him. He's not moving as fast as I think he thought he was, since he had actually said they were going to launch last year. But they're doing very well by all our measures that we can see.
All right. You mentioned EM1. On EM2 in 2021, we provided funding through this committee for enhanced upper stage in last year's bill, and it is not in your request, I believe, in 17.
It is not in the 2017 request. However, we continue to work on the exploration upper stage as a part of the 16 appropriations, and because we really want to fly the exploration upper stage as quickly as we can. And we'll, as I explained to the chairman, our hope is that we'll be able to work with the committees in the final determination, because, as I said again, it's you that decide what the ultimate appropriation is. And so, but we are working on the exploration upper stage, although we did not fund it because we had to prioritize, and we want to keep moving. We're actually looking at, we look at the SLS and Orion as part of a program.
Sure.
Everybody gets stuck on EM1 and EM2, and we're busy worrying about this 10-year period of time that we're going to be operating in cislunar space, and we'll need multiple vehicles, many more than EM1 and EM2, so that's what we're focused on.
But to achieve EUS larger capacity for EM2, there would need to be 17 funding, right?
You know,
I understand it's not it's not your request, but if there's no
Exactly.
funding there in 17, does that disrupt the ability to then have EUS and EM2 in 2021?
Let me go, I'll take it for the record because I want to give you a thorough answer. It would cause us, as you said, to interrupt the flow of the production of the exploration upper stage, but based on the budget that we submitted, we think we have a way to still produce the exploration upper stage for EM2, which is what we'd like to do.
Okay.
But we need to work with the committee, the appropriations committees, to make sure that we're getting the funding that would be necessary to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Jolly. General Bolden, just if I could very quickly, to be sure that y'all are following, NASA's following the appropriations bill.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We are, and that's what I meant, Mr. Chairman. We're working on the 2016
You're working off the-
appropriation.
Exactly. That's very important because over the years that I've had the privilege to serve on this subcommittee, I got so frustrated with your with predecessors, the previous president, not just this president, but previous presidents, who didn't give NASA the attention that you deserve, the support that you deserve. The president would come out with a budget, and NASA and every other agency would just change direction and start following the budget request instead of the appropriations bill. And I got so frustrated with it because it is damaging to the exploration upper stage, to these incredibly expensive and complicated spacecraft and rocket programs for the agency, all these fine men and women who have devoted their lives to building these rockets and spacecraft, to change course and start following the president's budget. This is a very important point I just want to drive home, is that I'm pleased to hear you say you are following the appropriations bill, because I put statutory language in last year's bill and this one that says literally no agency can change any program policy. You can't change funding levels for any program or policy based on the president's budget. You have to follow the appropriations bill, and you are following the appropriations bill.
We are following the 2016 appropriations presently, sir.
Thank you. So the budget recommendation from the president is simply a recommendation for our discussion. As long as you follow the appropriations bill, we're good.
That's the law.
That's the law, right.
Yes,
but
sir.
it's so frustrating to see the agency change course when we love you, we're devoted to you, and we want you to stay the course and follow 16 appropriations bill. Thank you. Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just observing, it's nice to have an agency come in where they're told they're loved. So, congratulations.
I'm all in.
So, thanks for being with us. You correctly observed my zeal for some of the exciting work being done by innovative entrepreneurial companies. A lot in my neck of the woods, which is getting a reputation as the sort of the Silicon Valley of space. But my interest goes beyond the parochial. It's excitement about the work that's being done, from building rockets and launching satellites to Earth imaging and remote sensing, to even some further out there ideas, including mining of asteroids and sending tourists to space. I think there's a lot of innovation and technical development that's happening, and it can lead to a lot of good American jobs. I guess, and not to mention the fact that it can bring down some of the costs associated with NASA's mission. I guess I want to just get a sense from you of how should NASA leverage these new space companies, both to encourage growth of the industry, but also to maximize the bang for the buck for what NASA spends on exploration and discovery in space. And also, if you can give a sense of, do you have the direction and the authority and the resources you need for those kinds of partnerships with the private industry?
Mr. Kilmer, thanks to this committee and the Congress and the appropriations funding in 2016, the one area where we were lacking was commercial crew. And thanks to the appropriations in 2016, we're now stepping it up and catching up, and both of our providers, Boeing and SpaceX, are telling us that they'll be ready for their certification next year, 2017. In a case that's close home to you, what our process allows us to do in working with industry and academia is it's not one size fits all. So we have the ability to use Space Act agreements, which are a form of contract. It's other transactional authority. It's not a real hard contract where they have to follow FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Blue Origin, for example, they are where they are today in the development of the BE-4 and the BE-3 engines that are probably going to enable us to free ourselves from the RD-180. They are 3 years down the road because of the work that they did with us through a Space Act agreement at Stennis in testing components of those engines. They didn't test the whole engine because they don't need to. They've got their own test facility. Same thing with SpaceX, Orbital. You look at companies, some enter into contracts with us, and others just want to do a little bit. So I think that's the way we've leveraged the ability of the commercial providers. As I mentioned to Mr. Jolly in his question, it has freed NASA up to do exploration, to do the big things that governments have to do. A lot of stuff we do, you can't expect a private company, even with a billionaire leader, to accept the risk for some of the what seems to be crazy stuff we do every once in a while. It's only a government organization that should do that.
I want to focus some attention on sort of a specific issue with regard to new technologies and some of the work being done by private industry. It is undoubtedly expensive to send supplies and equipment into orbit. It's also not easy, let alone sending those supplies all the way to Mars. And you're seeing companies develop ways to do everything from mining minerals and other resources such as water from asteroids, and incorporate 3D printing technologies into space systems so that large bulky components can actually get manufactured in space instead of trying to fit those pieces into rockets, which I think is amazing and innovative and out of the box. So how does and how should NASA partner with these innovative companies to incorporate these new technologies into planning for future space missions? You know, and is NASA working with industry partners to develop these new technologies, for example, solar electric propulsion to transport cargo and equipment beyond Earth orbit?
We are. And another example I'll give you is for the mission to Mars, the solar electric propulsion powered vehicle that's going to carry cargo, or for our asteroid redirect mission. That's going to be a robotic vehicle that's going to go to the asteroid to get a big boulder. We're not developing game-changing solar cells because we're partnering with industry. There are a few companies, and I won't bother to name them, but most are out in Southern California, others are different places, who are doing game-changing solar cells. Our job is to try to figure out how to package that, how to put a giant solar array that's using this high-energy solar cell, how do we package it and put it into the nose cone of a spacecraft? So that's the way we're leveraging, letting them do the development of the game-changing technology that way, and our job is to fit it into a spacecraft. If I go back to Blue Origin again, they're using 3D printing to produce engine parts. SpaceX is using 3D printing to produce engine parts. We are using 3D printing on the International Space Station now to produce tools. They're prototype. They're not metal tools yet because we haven't figured out how to do metal in the microgravity environment of space yet, because we still have to feed ribbons. We got to figure out a way to contain powders that you would do if you're going to do something like Inconel or stainless steel. But we're working with industry hand in glove. And I think if you go into some of our laboratories, or we'd like to see it in some of their factories, but we don't do it yet, you'll see them side by side with us in trying to get to the places we want to go.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, it's great to see you again.
Good to see you, Marine.
Tried to get rid of me, but you couldn't. Just went from one committee to the other.
Sure.
I just wish we could have gotten the 2015 authorization taken care of, but
That would have been nice.
we did. The House did its business. The Senate, of course, was absent. We'll just leave it at that. But anyway, it's been a great pleasure working with you to help NASA create a roadmap and rein in their focus so that we could pursue a mission to Mars and direct our resources and our energies towards that. As you shared with my previous committee and with this committee, that maintaining America's leadership in space is a priority of yours, as it is ours and the chairman's. And we all look forward to the day where we're launching American astronauts on American rockets from American soil. And so we're excited, and you referenced the students in here. I think they're going to be very excited just following the mission for us to get there. But I would like to start off with a question, and it's in regards to, well, let's just say, NASA is the only federal agency tasked with space exploration. Is there any other federal agency tasked with that mission in its charter?
Human space exploration, none. DOD does a little bit of space exploration.
For other purposes, right, civilian purposes.
We are the primary, we're the civil, the only civil agency tasked with space exploration.
And of course, it's important that we focus on commercial crew and cargo, as you've testified today and previously, that it frees NASA up to focus on the exciting stuff of deep space exploration. And I understand that, but yet every time we look at a budget, I see the Earth Sciences budget increasing, and I see the space exploration budget decreasing from NASA. And of course, it's Congress that comes in and helps plus up the space exploration budget. So when there's 13 other federal agencies tasked with climate science, do you think it's the best use of NASA's money to put into Earth Sciences, or would it be better to focus on commercial crew, cargo, and deep space exploration.
Mr. Palazzo, one of our charges in the original NASA Space Act of 1958 is to take care of the Earth. And so it has always been a responsibility of ours to provide cutting-edge technology that can be used by other agencies. We don't do weather, we don't do global warming, we just do data. And as I mentioned before, for 43 years we've produced every successful Landsat satellite that has been used by the U.S. Geological Survey. We produce the satellite, check it out, give it to them, and then we don't do anything after that. So it is our responsibility to the taxpayer to provide that type of cutting-edge technology that can answer some of the questions about our changing climate for them. I don't think it detracts from our ability to explore at all. In fact, it enhances our ability to explore because, the chairman can teach me on this. He knows a lot more about it than I do. We believe we all started from one thing at the time of the Big Bang, and, we want to understand what's happening to Mars.
Right.
We want to understand what's happening to other planets so that we understand our own planet better. But we do have to understand what I consider to be the most important planet in the world, which is Earth. And
Well,
that's what NASA does. is
And I appreciate that, and that's why, focusing on Mars and other planets would be planetary sciences, not Earth sciences. And I understand, but, 13 other federal agencies are spending billions and billions of dollars. I just wish we
They
could
don't
take...
do it as well as we do.
Well, yes, and I wish we'd just take the billions of dollars that we spend on it and put it into deep space exploration. My next question would be, and then this is just out of curiosity, are there any... are you aware of any nation state that has any possible lunar ambitions, whether, going there? I know China recently sent a rover, but are they looking to build any type of capacity possibly on the moon?
We are hopeful that a number of our partners, our international partners, are hopeful of putting things and people on the surface of the moon. We're going to spend 10 years in cislunar space, operating in the vicinity of the moon, beginning in 2018 when we launch SLS and Orion. That'll be the beginning of, we have this phrase, we call it the proving zone, and a lot of people don't like it, but it says very simply, we're going to spend the decade of the 20s with humans back in cislunar space. We're not ready to go to Mars yet, and so our hope is that over that period of time we'll be able to collaborate with some of our international partners to get them to share the load of getting humans back to the surface of the moon. Others talk about wanting to do a lander. The European Space Agency talks about a moon village. It's a concept, but it's a great concept when you talk about it. But we have to lead, and leading does not mean we have to do everything. We have to encourage them, support them so that they can do it. So there are any number of other nations that have a strong interest in going and doing research on the moon.
Right, and I hope those nations are friendly to America.
They're all very friendly.
The ones we're talking about.
The ones
right.
we're talking about.
The ones we're not talking about, I'm not so sure. In 2007, a certain nation state decided, out of their infinite wisdom, they were going to blow up a satellite in space, creating a lot of space debris. I think at last count, we try to track 500,000 pieces of space debris that orbits our Earth. How does that affect space travel, and how does it affect the assets that are so critical to our day-to-day lives, the quality of our life, our military, our communications, our banking, our financial, health care?
Congressman Palazzo,
What are we doing about it?
China, you're talking about the ASAT test that China did. While that was intentional, we had two commercial satellites that ran into each other and created the same kind of debris that did. Anything where two bodies come together in space and collide, whether it's intentional or otherwise, is bad for low Earth orbit. We're trying to work with a number of our international partners on what we call mitigation of orbital debris. That means that when we build a satellite, it has to have enough fuel that it won't orbit after it's finished with its lifetime. It won't just stay down there in low Earth orbit and become a target for something. It'll either be purposely deorbited into the ocean and destruct, or we'll move it into a higher orbit where it'll stay for hundreds of years and be out of the way of everybody. What we're not working on, because DOD, the intelligence agency, NASA, all understand the critical need for coming up with a means to do orbital debris removal. No one today has an active program in orbital debris removal, although some of our international partners would like to do that. That's what they want to focus on, and so we've got to do more.
Could you real quickly just emphasize the dangers that space debris provides to our space station, our space travel, and other very expensive assets in space?
A fleck of paint coming at the right angle toward the International Space Station would be disastrous. That's how, it's a big space, so I don't want to panic anybody. The U.S. Air Force and out in Colorado Springs, along with us, we track as much as we can. We track thousands of particles, pieces of orbital debris, and so every once in a while we have to maneuver the International Space Station, to avoid that. You're right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator.
General Bolden, real quickly, when you mention international partners, what countries are you thinking about, present and future international partners?
We have about 15 partners on the International Space Station today. If you're talking about aeronautics, we have 26 partners in something called the International Federation of Aeronautics Research, and so there are a lot. We have more than 800 signed agreements today with more than 120 nations in the world. So NASA is the world leader when it comes to aeronautics, science, and exploration.
Just want to be sure we're not talking about the Chinese.
Mr. Chairman, whenever we do anything with the Chinese, as I think you and the committee are aware, we submit a certification to you and to the Senate Appropriations Committee listing every individual that's going to be in the meeting, what the subject's going to be. We go through an enormous database.
Right, we clear that with the FBI.
We clear.
But we want to keep that contact very, very limited.
I just didn't want to mislead anyone
not our friend.
Yes, sir, that we don't do anything with the Chinese. When we do, though, we certify as required by law that the folk that we're working with are not engaged in human rights violations, are not engaged in terrorism, and there's going to be no exchange of technology. And we have lived by that.
Mr. Fattah.
Mr. Administrator, it's good to see you.
Great to see you, sir.
And
How's
we're still
Overbrook?
Overbrook High is doing very, very well, and mainly because of your visit. The science program is much more aggressive, but it is the alma mater of Guy and Buford, and NASA holds a special place. Not just there, but there was a time when over 3,000 engineers worked right at GE Reentry, right there in West Philadelphia. But let me just, first of all, thank you for your leadership, and it's been extraordinary. We've worked together on a lot of things, but particularly I'm pleased to see the commercial crew and cargo program going well, and I appreciate your comments earlier that this work in working with the private sector. You have a Philadelphia firm that's working with NASA now on new space uniforms for your astronauts, that this commercial partnership is critical in NASA being able to focus in on the things that we can't do in the private sector, and there's not a profit center for as of yet. I've spent some time, as the chairman is aware, making sure that we understand this. So I was out at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. My last visit, I had my wife with me, and we had a great time learning about the great work that's being done, and particularly looking at some of the earth science stuff and some of the other work that they're doing. You talked about the Space Act Agreement. I want to thank you for the partnership with the Boys and Girls Club of America. I'm meeting with them later on today, and this work in the 4,000 centers, clubs around the country, getting our young people interested in space and science is critically important, and we've got a partnership now with First Robotics, because at some point we have to understand, the Europeans and the Russians just in the last few days have launched a non-manned mission to Mars, right? Looking at methane and looking at some of the questions about life and the potential for life. That NASA is the premier leader in the world because of the team you have. And we have to be able to replenish that team at some, that we need young people who are going to focus on this. And I've talked to the chairman about this. It's very, very important that we not miss the boat in terms of the critical skill shortage that's going to materialize even more so in our national labs, at NASA, in terms of our nuclear enterprise. These are areas we don't have to worry about the Chinese. No, we only can have American citizens do this work. The problem is we don't have enough of them in the pipeline that are going to be in a position to do this work. So the last thing we want to do is have made all of these investments and then to fall short or on the baton pass into the next generation of leaders. So it's very, very important. I want to thank you for the leadership that you have put in. We talk about the rocket ships and all of this, but your presence at a school like Overbrook, your presence talking to young people, and in your team, I came over and met, witnessed your managers meeting in which you place in every single part of the agency a premium on making sure that they're working to get people ready to take on the work and the leadership of NASA. I wish you would just take a few minutes and talk about this part of your mission.
Well, one of the things that I think everybody knows, we've been the best place to work in the federal government in the large agency category for the last 4 years, and it primarily comes, I think, because of our mid-level managers and leaders, and it's the way that we push employee engagement, making sure that one, they emphasize the critical importance of diversity, which means numbers, but that in itself is not as important as inclusion. If there's a woman in the room or there's a minority in the room and nobody lets them say anything, they may as well not be there. So inclusion becomes the most important part of the D&I that we do. We put a lot of emphasis on it. We have a D&I partnership that is all the leadership of the agency, and we come together several times a year to talk about how we promote diversity and inclusion in the agency. And I think, we try to pass that on when we go out and talk to every time I talk to young people. I try to explain to them that, they got to get used to being in a room where everybody doesn't look like them, because that's the world. And they've got to be able to sit in a room where everybody doesn't think like them, and they've got to be able to give them the respect of at least
I thought the chairman and I were like kissing cousins or something. I mean, we look almost identical, right?
You'll do well. But that's sort of it. Employee engagement is, I think, is the key for people that ask about secret sauce. There is no secret sauce. It's our mid-level leaders who actually are the ones that touch and feel our employees every single day and try to impress them.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your extraordinary career in public service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Roby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Bolden, for being here. Thanks for being in front of our committee and all you do to advance our nation's future in space. I'm also glad that you and NASA officials earlier this year named Todd May the official director of Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama. Marshall plays a major role in NASA, as you know, and has a great impact on my home state. It employs almost 6,000 civil service and contractor employees with an estimated $3.8 billion in economic output and $96 million in state and local tax revenues. Just last week, NASA Day was held in my hometown of Montgomery, where Todd May and his team from Marshall spread the word about the importance of Alabama's role in NASA. With NASA. NASA's journey to Mars runs through Alabama. The words Director May, and I could not agree more. Those are the words he used. And so with that, I want to touch on Space Launch System and the Orion spacecraft. I know you talked to Mr. Jolly a little bit about this. There are suppliers in there are suppliers in all 50 states that contribute to SLS, and that shows a national effort to deep space exploration. And in the fiscal year 2016, NASA asked for $1.3 billion for SLS, and Congress, led by this subcommittee, made it to $2 billion, which was enacted into law. And this year, the president's request calls for $1.31 billion. And so wouldn't you guess that, that Congress, again, led by our fearless chairman here, this subcommittee would get funding upwards of $2.0 billion for this fiscal year. That's what we need, and I want to ask you to contribute to the conversation that your agency does project that EM1, that we'll reach EM1 in 2018, but the question is, do you actually think that we can meet this launch date with the funding requests of the President rather than what we hope to achieve here on this subcommittee?
Yes, ma'am. There's no doubt in my mind that we'll fly EM1 in 2018. That's what the President's budget supported, and that's how we picked it. And in fact, going back to something Mr. Jolly said, and I should correct one thing, 2023 is the agency's commitment date to EM2, and that's based on the President's budget run out. That is not based on appropriation. So 2021 is a date that we said, you know, we would hope to launch if instead of the run out that comes from the President's budget, we got.
Well, do you think that's likely to occur at the trajectory of the President's budget
The
request?
President's budget, we will launch in 2023, and that's with.
Oh, I was asking about 2021. If Congress were to increase the funding to the levels that,
I don't, you know, I try not to get into conjecture. If Congress increases the budget, we will use it to buy down risks. We will go out and procure advanced parts that we'll need for later on in the program. The discussion we had a little bit earlier was the fact that we're actually looking at supporting a program and not just the first two flights. So if we got more money, we may actually go out and get long lead items that would have no effect whatsoever on EM1 or EM2. What I can't do is bring EM2 forward, put all the money into that, have no long lead items, and then have no program. So I trust my people like Todd May and his team to tell me what they need and when they need it. What would really help is even appropriations. It's important to have magnitude, but it's also it is invaluable for those of you who have been in business to be able to follow a funding curve that lets you have a development program. We have never done that. NASA's funding curve has always been a flat line. That is not a development program, and we've got people like Todd and his team that take a flat, non-development program curve and make it work. So I'm saying a lot to say 2023 is the date to which we committed, and we'll make that date on the President's submission for 2017. If we get more money, we will buy down risk, we will do long lead items, and we believe that would enable us to launch sometime earlier. But I'll let Bill Gerstenmaier and his team come back and talk about what those specific dates are.
okay, thank you. I yield back.
To follow up on Ms. Roby's question, she's correct, and we are, all of us, strong supporters of getting the SLS program up and running as quickly as possible. But you said you're doing a run out. Your estimates on when you could launch are based on the President's budget?
We look at.
You really can't use that. That's just simply a recommendation. What matters is the appropriations.
You're absolutely right. The spending this year is determined by the appropriations that we get. You know, in my world, then I have to pick and choose some amount of funding, and so I pick what we assume the run out on our budget is going to be. That'll get us to 2030. That's impossible to think that.
Based on the President's recommendation.
Based on the President's out-year budget, and yeah. But we state, Mr. Chairman, we state that very clearly, that based on the President's budget request, at our key decision point where we made our official announcement about the date for launch and the cost of the vehicle, that very clearly states that's based on the President's budget request, not on a single year's appropriation. And we also, as I just said to Mr. Jolly and Mrs. Roby, if the Congress chooses to fund us at a higher level, that conceivably draws the launch date in, but not necessarily. Depends on, because we're talking about a program, you know, and we want to purchase long lead items, we want to do EUS.
Well, it's difficult to be critical of this good man because he's a Marine and a good soldier. And
No,
he's
Mr. Chairman,
no, but you're following the you understand. You've got to follow what the President's recommended. But I just want to make sure, Ms. Roby's right. We're going to get you the funding you need to make sure that SLS is taken care of. You can launch then on. You're expecting you'll be able to launch in 18 for EM.
18 for EM1 and 2023 for EM2. Mr. Chairman, you know, you have to understand, when we put a lot of these budgets together, we were still under sequester. we are still under sequester. That is not done yet. You know, it would be nice for me to pretend that the Congress has solved the sequester question. So the president's 2017 budget is optimistic if you compare that with what we would get under sequester. So I'm taking an optimistic view at being able to develop a program. We need to get our financial house in order. I agree with you all.
Sure. Talk to us a little bit about stability and certainty and predictability. What would be some of the things that, for example, in the NASA authorization bill that Mr. Palazzo mentioned from his work on the Science Committee? I've been keenly interested in this, and Chairman Smith has been very supportive of legislation that my predecessor, Frank Wolf, and I developed to try to give NASA greater certainty and predictability and stability in your out years so that you could plan for the future. What are some of the things, for example, multi-year procurement? I understand you've already got the ability to do multi-year procurement. And what can you do and what can the Congress do to support you in that effort to give the agency greater stability from year to year so you're not doing...
You really want my answer, sir?
I do. Thank you.
If the Congress were to do one single thing that would dramatically increase the stability to this agency and every other agency of the federal government, it would be multi-year funding. You know, one-year budgets, they make life miserable for American industry, for our workers, for everybody. If the authorization committee wanted to do one thing, just one thing that would dramatically change the way that this country operates and competes, it would be multi-year funding.
Now, you, of course, already have the authority to do multi-year procurement, however, on the main rocket
we get,
systems and
we get
spacecraft.
2-year money and we get that kind of, that's not the same as multi-year funding, where instead of giving me a 1-year budget, you give me a budget for 5 years.
You asked him the question, Mr. Chairman.
You are not about to do that because
But I want to find out within the existing boundaries
Mrs.
of the
Roby is
law,
smiling at me because
until we have...
she won't argue with the chairman there.
Within the existing,
Have a new
we know what the
authorization.
law is, Mr. Chairman. The law in the process is the president proposes and we dispose.
Sure, but I mean in terms of
And that's the
multi-year
law.
procurement, I'm talking about the greater
that's the-
stability for the
Mr.
future.
Chairman, that's
That was
another-
my one, you asked me for one thing that the authorization committee could do. The authorization committee, should I be quiet?
Yeah.
Oh, no, you asked me about
Sure,
authorizers,
sure.
because
Yeah.
as I understand it, the way this thing
This is,
works is, in a perfect world, the authorizers give you guidance, they give you a roadmap, and then you fund it. That
Right.
almost never works. You know, since I've been the NASA administrator for 6 years, I think I've had 2 authorization bills.
Yeah, it's
maybe
been very
3.
frustrating because the House, as Mr. Palazzo says, we do
I
our
share
part.
your frustration, Mr.
They
Chairman.
disappear in the Senate.
Yes, sir.
So that, but you would be able to, for example, as you mentioned, do advanced procurement of critical components. As in
Yes, sir.
You've
That
already
would
got
be-
that authority.
that would be incredible.
If we gave you the funding necessary, for example, on SLS,
Yes, sir.
as you said, Ms. Roby, you could do advanced procurement of critical core components. That's done in the Virginia-class nuclear submarine program,
Yes, sir.
for example.
Yes, sir.
The Navy will buy components of the nuclear reactors in advance
Yeah.
in order to help make sure that they've got some stability over multiple years. Let me ask you very quickly, when this year will you, before I pass it to Mr. Honda, to follow up one last question on the Europa mission, when over the next few months will you be announcing announcement of opportunity for the science instruments to be included on the lander for Europa? That'll
Mr.
be
Chairman,
this year.
that won't happen this year. You know, we have to decide, first of all, I think I mentioned earlier that, and I will, let me take it for the record because I don't want to
Do
misspeak,
that
because
for
I
the
know
record.
you have information from
let's-
JPL and others, and I don't want to,
We'll get that
I don't
for
want to
the
get
record.
crosswise with the guys that work for me.
Take that for the record. Let's do that for the record.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Honda.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to go back a little bit on my questions on that deals with Europa and the astrobiology missions in our solar system. 2 weeks ago, we had the pleasure, through Chairman Culberson's leadership, of hosting a very interesting hearing on exploring the water worlds of our solar system, starting with the Jovian moon of Europa. I'm also very pleased that the science mission director had recently recognized other water worlds, including Enceladus, and with potentially interesting astrobiology, and open a new frontiers competition to look into exploring these worlds as well. As part of the discussion with Dr. Alachi and Dr. Lenine, we heard that searching for signs of life and searching for planetary habitability, see, I can say that word today, I fell over that word last time, for life are two different things. And we heard that a planned orbiter and potential lander will analyze habitability of Europa, which is quite different from detecting life or signs of life. So the life and impactor, searching for the signs of life, a goal of the Europa Clipper mission, and what would be required to actually search for life, and not just for habitability, but with the orbiter.
This is out of my league, but as I understand it, when we search for signs of life, like the James Webb Space Telescope will help us do in a lot of the exoplanets and planets orbiting other suns and other solar systems and other galaxies. We're looking for the basic constituents of life, something that could produce microbes, oxygen, hydrogen, potassium. We can do that remotely, but when you're searching for life itself, there is nothing like, as the chairman says, putting a lander down there and having them go out and touch and feel and get a sample. And is that really a microbe, or is that just a disparate collection of the components of microbial life? So when people ask me all the time, why don't we just do robotic exploration? Robotic exploration is great, but at some point you need to put a human into the environment so that we can determine whether we're looking at disparate pieces of life or whether we're actually looking at life itself.
Does that have to do with, I guess what I heard the term was?
And the disclaimer I made, Mr. Honda, was that I don't know what I'm talking about. You
No,
know,
I
I'm
heard
telling you
you the
what
first
what
time.
my chief scientist and others tell me.
Being a science teacher, though, a lot of times it's better for me to learn how to ask a question, not know the answer.
Yes, sir.
But this whole term, handedness of amino acids, is that part of the effort to look at perhaps other kinds of missions or concepts for the Clipper to get engaged in?
You talked about earlier, you and Mr. Kilmer talked about CubeSats, microsats, and the like, concepts for the future. When you talk about both looking for signs of life and evidence of life, are, for example, on future missions to Europa or Enceladus or some of these other moons that have the geysers, the geyser activity, is to fly a small sat or a CubeSat through a geyser where it gets wet. That'll tell you whether there's life there. And when we talk about future Europa missions, that is what you would hope you will do. You get the guys out at JPL started, and they can tell you all kinds of stuff, but it doesn't happen overnight the way that they sometimes would like to have us believe. It's a slow slog.
There's a lot of discussions around that. And when we did talk about geysers, it was clear that there were natural occurring geysers, and then there's we can impose or create geysers through impacts. Is that something that?
I'll have to take that for the record, Mr. Honda. One of the reasons we want to do a very serious study of Europa, for example, with orbiters, is because we believe it'll take us about 2 years to completely map the surface. You don't do one orbit and you're happy.
Sure.
It's probably 2 years, and that way we'll be able to find out where is the ice thickest, where is it thinnest, where is it most likely to be. If you're going to artificially try to produce an opening for water to come up, where is it most likely to be able to do that? The other thing about Europa that's, at least I think I understand this, is that some of the other moons, icy moons, have geysers with regularity that are predictable. So we could, you can schedule when you're going to fly through that. And we haven't had that, to my knowledge, we've not had that benefit from Europa yet. We see them sometimes, but they don't occur with regularity like Old Faithful out in Yosemite. Is that where Old Faithful is?
Well,
Okay.
in another way of looking at future funding and how we can look at robust funding and take advantage of the kinds of things that we develop at NASA, the term technology transfer is something that is very important, I think, in terms of what we do at NASA and how this technology transfer can be commercialized into the commercial arena. So, taking these kinds of technologies and transfer them can provide a lot of jobs and a lot of activities, sometimes beyond what we really would be able to imagine. Can you talk a little bit about technology transfer program and explain to me the funding levels that have occurred over time, whether it's declined, remained the same? It appears that it's declining, and it seems like this is something that we really should be paying attention to make sure that we really do plus up with the kinds of investment we make in research and development. And
I will take it for the record to get you specific numbers, but I seem to recall that when you look at what we're doing now to measure our effectiveness in technology transfer, for example, the Office of Chief Technologist and the Space Technology Mission Directorate, between the two of them, we now have a technology transfer database so that we can go in and we can see which technologies have made it to the into industry or academia or into entrepreneurs. One of the global ideas about the success of technology transfer is our spin-offs book that we produce every year that lists thousands of technologies that have been spun off from work that NASA's done, but that's not a sufficient way to be able to track, to give you metrics on your technology transfer. So the fact that we have produced this database and that we now keep it better than we ever did before leads me to believe that we're putting more money into technology transfer. But we'll get you the data. I'll take that for the record.
Yeah, this will be the last part of this question round. Seems to me the kind of wealth that we can realize from technology transfer should be something that we should track, because it gives us a sense in the future that the investment we're making now will pay off in the long run, not only for the projects that we're planning for, but also for the general economy of our country. And if that pencils out the way I think it should, there should be more attention being paid, as the chairman would like to see, on the kinds of things that we do. And it enhances our life, and enhances the quality of our life, and it probably provides a lot of different kinds of aspects that we haven't even thought of, and it takes Moore's Law a little further out, too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to give you this, something that reminds me of my visit to NASA. I think it sits on one of the things that we're looking at, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Mr. Jolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one very quick top-line question. One of the justifications for moving to commercial providers for crew and cargo to station was to essentially spend less or achieve certain efficiencies and savings, so that then you can focus on other activities. Are we spending less? Have we achieved savings?
I would say we are, sir. I'll take it for the record to get you the specific data on comparative costs between what NASA was paying in the days of the Space Shuttle program, when we had to provide all the infrastructure and everything.
Sure.
So, yes, sir.
Okay. That's it. Easy question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Palazzo.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From previous hearings in the authorizing committee, there was some focus on the safety and security of our proprietary information. It seems like laptops were sneaking out of the building. Personnel, foreign nationals were carrying information out, and it was addressed. Of course, we tried to look into whether those responsible were actually punished, and I won't go into that. Hopefully they were, but it seemed to be that it was if the security managers or if the managers of the facilities aren't taking the security seriously, because your scientists want to go do scientific stuff, so it comes down to the managers and HR and I guess others to actually make sure they're taking this kind of stuff seriously, because we work very hard coming up with this proprietary information. We spend a lot of money to do it, and it helps America maintain its competitive edge. The last thing we want to do is walk out the door, because again, we know some nation states out there that just love for us to spend all our money, do all the hard work, and they just want to steal what we come up with to help them then take jobs away from America. how has the culture changed, and have you seen this all the way down to the center level where our managers are taking this seriously, and if they're not, why are they still managing these facilities?
Mr. Palazzo, I think, as I said, everything is a long slog. Since we, when you were on the Authorization Committee, you may remember that as a result of several incidents, we brought in the NAPA to do a study on our foreign national access management program. They gave us 27 recommendations. To date, we've closed 22 of those recommendations. We also got audits from the GAO and the IG, and we have worked on those. We now have a full-fledged foreign national access management program with a program manager stood up. The NAPA has just finished a revisit. They've come back and done an update visit on our program, and we're working right now with them on their draft to make sure that we understand what the recommendations are going to be. But the preliminary indication is that we'll get a good grade, that they're satisfied with the success that we have done in incorporating this. We have emphasized export control. We've emphasized need to follow ITAR. We have now an export control manual that is accessible by all members of the NASA family and contractors. We now have training in our regular training program such that each NASA employee is required to undergo annual training on foreign national access management, on export control. We have a counterterrorism, intelligence face-to-face meeting among all of our NASA center folk. We do that every year. Last year, we did it at the Johnson Space Center in November. I went to that meeting. Also present at the meeting were senior officials from the FBI and a number of other intelligence agencies. They presented to us. They presented some of the training. It is going back to the certification of Chinese when we work with them, it is my intention to visit with Director Comey at the FBI to make sure that the certification process that we have in place meets his approval, and that it is, he's happy with the way we're doing it. So I would say that you go down to the bottom of the rung, you'll find that people, they understand the importance of control of our vital resources and protection of our classified and sensitive information. So I think we've done quite a bit.
Well, Administrator, I'm glad you're taking it a lot more serious. In the private sector, if an employee allows a laptop to walk off with 10,000 of their employees' sensitive information, that employee is likely going to be fired. And so, I mean, it seems like throughout the federal government, not just NASA, but there's not a lot of accountability. Employees, and of course, when you see agency heads committing all kind of awful stuff, and it's kind of hard to punish the people down beneath them. But this is important stuff. Proprietary information to allow America to maintain its competitive edge, to maintain our leadership in space. I just slap on the wrist, and I'm not saying I'm going off on some other agencies. There needs to be some teeth and holding people accountable for what they do. And the Administrator also mentioned a very successful 502nd RS-25 flight engine test at Stennis Space Center. Mr. Chairman, if you have not been to Stennis Space Center, it's an open invitation. I would love to host you for a day, and hopefully we can coordinate it around a test. Who knew NASA could make it rain? And they do that with some of their engine tests. And of course, the whole committee is invited as well, Mr. Honda. So,
thank you.
All right, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Palazzo is right. It's extraordinarily important. Protecting the nation's space program and our technology from penetration by foreign agents is very important. And I know there was a problem at Ames, for example, in letting foreign nationals come into the facility. So you mentioned, General Bolden, heard you say foreign national access management. I hope you've got procedures in place to essentially keep foreign nationals out of NASA flight centers and they don't get access to.
Mr. Chairman, I cannot stand here and say that's true. That is not true. We have foreign nationals who operate on NASA facilities every day. We have foreign nationals who may actually be NASA employees, like every other agency of the federal government. So I understand what you mean.
Chinese are the ones
the Chinese,
most concerned about.
that's different. Yeah.
So no Chinese foreign nationals are getting access to NASA flight centers or computers?
No foreign nationals are getting unauthorized access to any classified material, sensitive material. No, none,
Okay,
zero.
thank you.
So,
Thank you.
but Mr. Chairman, I want to be very clear. No unauthorized access. Anytime anyone who is not an American, in fact, even American citizens have to go through a very stringent process to be allowed to have access to classified and sensitive material. That program is much more robust for a foreign national. So I just don't want to lead you to believe that we've put a wall up and only
Perfect.
Americans are going into bases.
But the ones we're most concerned about are the Chinese.
Yes, sir.
Because the Chinese space program is owned lock, stock, and barrel, controlled by the People's Liberation Army. It's a military program designed to help them better target their ICBMs in the United States, and they have a long history of stealing our technology. And it's just unacceptable, the level of cyber theft and espionage the Chinese have been engaged in. And our predecessor, Frank Wolf, very wisely, with a lot of foresight, included language in our bill, which we have kept and strengthened, that in Section 531, General Bolden governs NASA's bilateral activities with China. And I wanted to ask if you could, sir, to please explain the process that NASA uses to ensure compliance with Section 531, which in part states that NASA must certify that these bilateral activities, these meetings, pose no risk of technology transfer or other information with national security or economic security implications to China or to a Chinese-owned company. How does NASA ensure compliance?
Yes, sir. And I made reference to this a little bit earlier. In order to follow the law pursuant to Section 531, we actually use an independent third-party tool to execute our foreign national investigations. The tool is called Visual Compliance, and that allows us to look at, among other databases, but there are 5 FBI databases, there are several Department of Treasury databases, those from the Department of Commerce, Department of Homeland Security, the State Department Arms Export Control Department list, and on and on and on. And so that's the process that we use for every single person that I put on a certification letter to you. And as a result of some additional direction that came in Section 531, I now also provide a copy of that certification letter to the director of the FBI. It goes via email transmission it doesn't go to Director Comey personally, but it goes to his executive secretary, and it goes to the section chief of the FBI headquarters counterintelligence division, who right now is Mr. Crouch. So, and as I said, my intent sometime after this hearing is to actually sit down, or at least maybe not sit down, but talk to Director Comey and make sure that this process that I just explained to you meets the requirements and the needs of the FBI, so that they can feel that what we're certifying is in fact accurate.
Right, because the reason that new language was added was to be sure that you're not just telling the FBI, but that you're involving them, that we want you to be able to hear back from them, and for them to be able to tell you, this looks like it's okay or that's not okay.
Sure.
Let me ask if I could, let me go to Mr. Honda. I've gone over a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. 2 things. When we were in NASA, we visited a gadget into which we climbed. It's called an arc jet. And the function of that is to determine pressure and temperature of reentry of capsules and missiles, for that matter. And I understood that it's probably the most unique piece of equipment that we have, but it's also that we're far behind in keeping it up and maintaining it. And I just wondered whether, if these arc jets are not capable of recreating the actual temperature and pressure that we anticipate, then how are we going to be able to ensure that that facility will be upgraded so that the return will be safe for our reentry of our astronauts in the capsule.
Mr. Honda, you give me an opportunity to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, and that's the arc jet about which you speak is in basic terms, it's a wind tunnel. And it's a wind tunnel that we generate incredible heat inside it. So we're looking at thousands of degrees, and we're looking at the ability of a nose cap, for example, or something, the nose of a missile, to be able to withstand the heat and pressure of reentry. The upgrade on the arc jet facility comes under a portion of our budget that's called Construction of Facilities and Environmental Compliance and Restoration. And that just happens to be a part of the budget that both the Congress and the administration like to use as a bank to which they can go. So I would say when we...
Could you say that again?
I use the term bank. It's a place.
It's a fund that we go to.
It's a fund that everybody likes to go to because it's quote unquote not important. It is very important. It is because in that fund, it is where safety and mission assurance, engineering, construction of facilities, upgrade to facilities is all book kept, and salaries. And so when we take money from and I forget what the real name of it is, CSM something, I forget, but you all know what it is. When we go into that fund to take out a few $1 million, then what we have to do, what Mr. Eugene Tu out at Ames has to do is decide, okay, I'm going to delay upgrade on the ArcJet facility for 1 more year because I don't have the money to do that. And
this has some relationship to our discussion about multiple year funding and
exactly.
multiple year procurement. Multiple year procurement requires that we have the funds so that we can lay it out there in the future for that 1 year's allotment. Multiple year means that, we can have some certainty that we can have a budget that we can count on so that Dr. Tu will be able to keep this ArcJet performing at a place where we can assure that the reentry of our capsules will be tested in an appropriate way. And so I think that it's a small piece, but without properly maintaining it and keeping it up to date, we get to Mars and we come back. If we come back and we hit that atmosphere and that's the piece that's messed up, I think it'd be, that's that one piece that we have to pay really attention to, even though it may be, the budget may not be, it's a budget that we keep dipping into to say, oh, we'll take care of it later. But, if we want to anticipate astronauts coming back and not watching them burn up on reentry, then we have to take care of that, regardless of what kind of funding mechanism we have. So I just wanted to make that a point. And connected to that, we talk about commercialization too. There's been a couple of commercial cargo explosions. And what are some of the things that we're doing to make sure that when we do send astronauts up using commercial launches, what are we doing as NASA to assure that those astronauts that we do send up are going to be safe and that the launches are going to be safe in 2 years?
Mr. Honda, just as we did from both, in fact, all three, we had 3 cargo mishaps. We lost a Progress vehicle, we lost a Dragon, and we lost a Cygnus, all in a 12-month period of time. From each of the accidents, we had NASA personnel who were part of the accident investigation team. We either did our own supplemental investigation in addition to being a part of the team, or in the case of the SpaceX accident, since they have a number of different contracts with us, and they have ongoing launches, not just for space station, then we're constantly involved with them. But in all 3 cases, we were able to satisfy ourselves that we understood what the root cause of the accident was, that they were taking appropriate actions to ensure that cause was taken care of, was corrected or remedied, and that we would be able to go fly again. I think everybody knows we accept more risk with cargo than we will ever do with crew. So we are already, you step up your safety requirements, if you will, your criteria for a human-rated launch much more than you do for a cargo launch. And so, but we feel that we have the correct amount of insight and in some cases oversight with both Boeing and SpaceX right now to ensure, I will say Boeing, SpaceX, and the Orion program team, because they're all three the same in our eyes. We're going to have astronauts on all three vehicles, and so they have to have the same level of safety and mission assurance, and we have to have the same amount of visibility into all three before we'll launch.
And if I may, what role, if any, does aerospace industries
The
have
corporation?
Corporations.
Aerospace is an FFRDC for the U.S. Air Force, and I have the Office of Safety and Mission Assurance, and I think that aerospace is, in fact, effectively the Office of Safety and Mission Assurance for the Air Force in most of their missile launches. I could be incorrect, but that's the way that I look at them. And so we consult with aerospace frequently because with SpaceX, as an example, because both the Air Force and NASA use SpaceX, our Safety and Mission Assurance Organization and our Office of Chief Engineer work hand in glove with aerospace all the time, because sometimes neither of those three organizations has the sufficient number of people to cover everything. So aerospace may cover something and debrief us, we may cover something and debrief them, but they work together all the time. The present CEO of aerospace, Dr. Wanda Austin, hosts a safety quality summit I think it's twice a year, and Robert Lightfoot, who is the senior civil servant in NASA, he is the associate administrator, or in a civilian company, he'd be called the chief operating officer. Robert attends that summit each year along with some of the folk from our Safety and Mission Assurance Organization and the Chief Engineer's Office, and so that there's constant interchange of ideas and experience with aerospace. But they're not technically in our chain of command, if you will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Mr. Palazzo.
Well, Mr. Chairman, real quick, we're talking, you mentioned flat budgets, and it is kind of bad that NASA's been stuck on flat budgets, because in our facilities directors, and as well as NASA, the administration has done a good job with the flat budgets that we've given, and that just makes me want to make a few comments. One, we're $19 trillion in debt as a nation, but I don't think NASA's spending on deep space exploration and low Earth orbit is what's driving those deficits. Nor is our Department of Defense spending, investing in our men and women in uniform so they too can have the tools and training to do their job and come back home to their loved ones. But it's the out-of-control mandatory spending. And in Congress, I know the NASA can't fix it, this administrator can't fix that, or others, but the American people should be demanding of Congress that we rein in the out-of-control spending, but we don't even have a vote on it because it's on autopilot, it's mandatory. And it's sad because it is keeping us from doing the hard things at NASA, the great things, in funding, not only just NASA, but also our military at levels that we need to secure our nation. So I hope one day we have that conversation, and we can get past it, because we got to curb the 19 trillion, or we won't be having too many fun discussions on funding NASA's future ambitions. There won't be a Mars trip. There won't be a back to the moon. There won't be America's leadership in space will be challenged, and we don't know how we'll come out if we don't fix our national debt and do it. And if we start today, then it's achievable. If we keep kicking the can down the road until tomorrow, it just gets harder and harder and harder. So that was just more of a comment than anything, because that's something that's always keeping many of us up at night. So, and again, Administrator, appreciate your career in the United States Marine Corps, as well as at NASA.
Thank you, sir.
No problem. Thank you.
Semper Fi.
Thank you very much. Administrator Bolden, just a couple more follow-up on the commercial crew program. I want to ask if any of the fiscal year 16 milestones slipped into 17 or beyond on commercial crew.
Mr. Chairman, I'll take that for the record. To my knowledge, none have slipped that we didn't ask to be slipped for one reason or another, or that we didn't coordinate with, with the providers to slip it because it would be, but I'll take that
Which
for the record.
milestones do you recall?
That's why I said I don't
Slipped.
think any slipped, but that's why I said, when you talk about, sometimes people use the term slip when in fact we purposely move something to a later date to accommodate some other test. So what I would like to do, if it's okay with you, is to take it for the record
Yes, sir.
and then tell you how any milestones that were scheduled to be done in 2016 are now being done in 2017 and why.
I want to also ask about the next generation rocket propulsion. As you
Yes.
look into the future, and the one aspect of the asteroid mission that I think is particularly exciting is the development of the next generation rocket propulsion. So I want to ask about NASA's work on not only solar electric, nuclear electric, but then also ask about the level of plutonium that you have available. There's only, as I understand it, about 35 kilograms currently, or 77 pounds of plutonium-238 set aside for NASA missions, and this will only support about 2 or 3 NASA missions through the middle of the 2020s. What are you satisfied with the level of funding that you have to understand that the Department of Energy has wanted NASA to take the lead on this? We made sure that you had funding for plutonium-238 production in your 16 bill. What do you need from this committee and the Congress in order to make sure that you've got a sufficient supply of plutonium-238 for future missions, and which missions do you expect to use plutonium for beyond the 2020, Mars 2020?
As my memory serves me, Mr. Chairman, we have sufficient funding and sufficient sources of plutonium for the missions that are in NASA's plan right now. Mars 2020 being the next mission that will require nuclear fuel. Thanks to the, in a conversation with Dr. Grunsfeld, the head of the Science Mission Directorate yesterday, when we were talking about Juno that arrives at Jupiter here on Independence Day, you probably know that Juno is not nuclear powered. Juno is powered by solar arrays, new generation solar arrays, giant ones. But according to Dr. Grunsfeld yesterday, it is because of the work that we did on Juno and the success of those solar arrays that our team, along with JPL, is now leaning toward solar power, not solar electric propulsion, solar power for Europa, which would mean that we would not need nuclear power for the Europa mission. But that again, as I mentioned, we won't know that until 2018 when we get to preliminary design review and finish out the formulation of the mission. But that's where it's leaning right now.
Talk about, if you could, talk to us about the next generation of rocket propulsion. What do you envision being developed to succeed chemical propulsion, and what are you doing today to develop that next generation?
When people ask me about going to Mars and what are the challenges, I tell them radiation is one, time is another one, and we need game-changing propulsion, game-changing in-space propulsion. We are now funding at a very low level development or research on what we call low-grade nuclear fuel, so that we don't have to go through the complicated process that we do now to get enriched, the type of enriched fuel that we use today. That holds out some hope. There are other systems. People are looking at advanced solar electric propulsion. You have people like Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz has a rocket that's called VASMR. It's variable specific impulse thrust, which is a constantly thrusting ion engine, that we're funding we're funding the upgrade of a laboratory where he's doing testing now to just see if he can get it ground tested, and then we'll go see what happens after that. If that type of propulsion systems bode well for the future. But nuclear electric, I think, is the one that most people tell me is probably going to be what we need, but we've got to get the fuel issue solved first. So, but we're making slow progress.
Mr. Honda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Learning quite a bit over these past few weeks. I'd like to get some of your thoughts on comments that were made about space launch system a couple years ago by a gentleman by the name of Chris Kraft, NASA's first flight director. He said that the operating cost of SLS, quote, he says, will eat NASA alive. And he lamented that while other existing rockets have become reliable through frequent use, the SLS will not achieve that level of reliability because, in his view, we won't be able to afford to launch it more than once a year, if that. On the subject of future human space flight missions to deep space, Mr. Kraft has also questioned why we can't use our existing launch vehicle capabilities and put vehicles into space in pieces like we did the space station. So, two questions. How do you respond to these sorts of concerns about this space launch system, and what is NASA doing to work with industry and government partners develop the spectrum of missions beyond E1 and E2, EM1 and EM2 to fully utilize this enormous national asset that will be coming online in only a few short years?
Mr. Honda, Dr. Kraft is a role model and a mentor for me. He was my center director when I first became an astronaut and went to the Johnson Space Center. He is an incredible human being. From Virginia Tech, by the way. I did not know that until short time ago. We always think about everybody comes from Harvard and Stanford and stuff. Pretty good institution down there in Blacksburg.
Sure.
But his statement about SLS is, I think, and I cannot speak for Dr. Kraft, I think a lot of people's statements like that are based on how we operated when they were in charge or when they were around. That's a long time ago. SLS, it represents the best technology that we have today to leave the planet. I think most people will tell you we don't have a way other than chemical propulsion today to get off the planet. And we will probably always want to use something like an SLS when you talk about the Europa mission. And while I'm not making a commitment, Mr. Chairman, I want you to understand what I'm saying here. SLS it represents an incredible promise and potential, not just to human space flight, but to scientific space flight. The reason we're all attracted to SLS for a Europa mission or any outer planets mission is because, 9 years to get somewhere, or 8 years to get somewhere, or 7 years, that's a long time. The team, it's hard to hold them intact. You're paying for them. It's much cheaper if we can use if it turns out that SLS is able to be used for a Europa mission. We're talking about a 2.5-year mission. To get, that's 5 years we've saved in transit time, in salaries, in keeping a team enthused, not shutting the vehicle down the way we did with New Horizons. There are a lot of good reasons to do it, but that is not a commitment to SLS. I want to make sure you understand that, Mr. Chairman. It said, you told me to make sure it happens. I'm trying. But I would not, in response to that, even if it's in the law, if I found it were not the right thing to do, I would come to you and say, Mr. Chairman, can we review this policy, because that is not in the best interest of the American taxpayer. So we are following the law, and we will always follow the law, but sometimes things change and you go back and you revise the law. It's like our Constitution. That's why we have amendments. We find that the Founding Fathers weren't, though brilliant, maybe they weren't as smart as we thought they were the first time around or something like that. I don't know.
Based on history, too.
That's exactly right.
Someplace else. So
Yeah,
it was pretty
exactly.
cool. I just needed to ask a question just to clear out some of the questions I had
Yes,
in
sir.
my mind. And I think that the explanation is...
And I hope I answered the question.
No,
I wasn't, because I would not, Dr. Kraft is
No, I get what
way
you're
more
saying.
brilliant than I am and knows this stuff a lot better than I do, but I have the advantage of a team around me that he didn't have.
Sure.
You have to remember, most of us forget, I have a very mature leadership team. When Dr. Kraft was in mission control and when he led the Johnson Space Center, we went to the moon,
I get it.
most of the people were 20 years old.
Well, that's the difference.
They didn't know anything.
Well, that's the difference, like, between myself and my son. When I launched an airplane, it was made out of balsa wood, and I pushed it off. he uses a battery now, and he's got all kinds of things at hand. So I just wanted some sort of clarification in my mind.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Well, General Bolden, we want to thank you again for your service to the country and for the service you've given to NASA, the leadership. It's been a privilege for us to work with you. And we'll have a number of questions that we'll submit to the for the record, sir. But again, from the bottom of our heart, we genuinely appreciate your service to the country. And this subcommittee in the Congress strongly supports the men and women at NASA, and we'll do everything we can to make sure you've got the resources you need to achieve all that you that is on your plate, and to ensure the American space program is the very best in the world, bar none.
Thank you,
very
Mr.
much,
Chairman.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the hearing is adjourned.
Sure.